Hello again, guys, and welcome back to another Tim Cain video, this time on collecting feedback. I don't know what locations he's referring to, but we'll just jump in without too much yapping. I know it's a change.
Hi everybody, it's me, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Today I want to talk about
I missed you,
collecting
man.
feedback.
Yeah.
Specifically, how and when and what to do with the feedback that you get.
You throw it in the trash. You never listen to it. You are the designer. You are the developer. Your ideas matter. This is your art. Throw it all in the trash. No. I know people would like to think that, but there is like a middle ground, right? You do need to act on feedback because you're commercializing your game. People need to buy it. And if people don't want to buy it because you aren't listening to them, can't tell if serious. No, you do need to listen to players. However, you need to determine what is and should be listened to. You know, what's viable and what you probably could discard, especially from like, quick example, people who are not in your target market. It's not that their feedback is not valuable, but it likely isn't always coming from a place of knowing what the game should be, right? If I only play sports games and I jump into Skyrim and I say, hey, I wish I could play sports in this, you know, okay, this is not the game for you. That's really what it comes down to. Killing 4-3, though, needed the feedback to avoid a turd. I'm curious about Killing 4-3. I hope it's good. I will try it. Because Killing 4-2 was,
On the game you're making. So this is obviously aimed at game developers, but I thought a lot of people would like hearing about this.
Yeah.
So here we go. I'm going to break this into feedback you get before you ship and feedback you get after you ship. So before you ship, there are basically three sources of feedback.
Let's see if I can guess them. Playtests, publisher, and internal. Maybe the internal one is a little bit too on the nose, though. But we'll see.
You can get feedback from the team itself.
Okay, internal.
People will be playing the game and we'll be working on different parts of the game, and they're certain to give you feedback saying, hey, I don't think this is working, or hey, this just happened to me and it was really fun. That's great because these are people who are really close to the game you're putting together and are really invested in it.
That can be nice. One thing to worry, though, is that most developers working on games have tunnel vision, especially designers can have tunnel vision with their own game. And it's hard to step back or to play your game in a way that is accurate to the way that new players would play it, or people with no knowledge. I can't play Colden Chronicles right now in a viable way because I know everything. Like, I know what does what for the most part. I know what NPCs need. I know how it calculates. I know where the stories lead. There's no guesswork there. And therefore, I just am not a good playtester for feedback of that nature. But I can find bugs, right? Because I can kind of piece together how I might be able to break something that I've made.
It can also be bad because these are people really close to what you're putting together and really invested in it. So that's a pro and con right there, because they may be so close they don't see a problem, or they played the game 100 times. So
okay, I'm sorry, Tim. I'll shut up. I'll stop yapping. You're right. You already resolved all the things I'm saying, as usual.
See a problem versus they may see a problem and go, that's not a big deal. Unlike someone
that's a good
who
point.
ends up buying the game may think it is a big deal. So it's a good time to collect feedback, though, as early as possible. QA feedback is especially important. I have an entire video on how we play tested the Outer Worlds. I'll link it below. Feedback from your QA staff is invaluable because no one will play your game as frequently or as much as QA.
I would even say that, sorry, Tim, I'll go back because you're on a bad pause frame. That's also a bad pause frame. That's better. You look angry. Nobody will break your game like QA will. Like, I have QA friends. I don't know if Bartosz is still here, but he's in QA. He will just load up my game and start slamming his hands on the keyboard. And it will break the game. And then he'll complain to me that it broke the game. You know, you love to hate them, you hate to love them. But QA is necessary. They will find all the bugs. They will know your game. Arguably, QA will often know your game better than anyone else on the team. They will be very, very knowledgeable about how to do certain things, how to solve certain problems, how systems work, how to play the game, because they've had to do it over and over and over and over again in every single iteration. If you ignore QA, which I've seen managers do, I've seen teams. I mean, we looked at yesterday the average salaries of different jobs in Poland. QA gets paid the least, and it's not even a close margin. Well, who here has played a Polish game where they can definitely tell that QA was not being paid very well? At work, QA knows the product better than devs. Yes, they do. Absolutely. Absolutely. They give great feedback. They give very accurate feedback, very harsh feedback. And if you think that they're being assholes, they're not. They have just been, their soul has been taken out of them. But you should listen to them. QA is great. Treat your QA well, and they will treat you well.
As frequently or as much
Push
as QA. Although I think I gave them a run for their money on several of my games. But in general, QA plays your game all day.
Yep.
Every day.
Yep.
So they see a lot of problems because they're in there. That they're using those UIs all day long. They're playing against that AI all day long. They see issues. Listen to them. And then part of the team is your publisher. They will give you feedback as well. I've found that some publisher feedback was invaluable. They pointed out something that we weren't seeing, or they pointed out something that just a slight change would make the game way more broad and appeal.
Yeah, I mean, they're working with marketing teams, right? And they've just published tons of different games. They do see that feedback. Publishers get a bad rap, but it's sometimes hit or miss, and it depends on the publisher. But there are a lot of publishers that are just, they want the best for the game too, because if the game sells better and gets better reviews, they profit as well. I mean, that helps them. So it's not that they don't want the game to be good, they just often want it to be as good as possible for the least amount of money. That doesn't mean that their feedback is not valuable.
Frequently, though, they're thinking of more of CYA stuff. They're like, uh-oh, I think I saw a booby on level 2. Take care of that. So their stuff tends to be much more specific.
Yeah, I mean, he's right. Like, it's stuff that matters more to, like, the legality or to the marketing, things of that nature. So, but that's still valuable. It just has less to do often with the fun of the game. And some of it might be like, hey, make sure to cut this out early because that will, cause problems with certification or something, or with, like, legal. Although I will tell you that one time, the Japanese Imperial flag made it into a early build of our game. I don't remember the story of how that got there. I think it was some outsourced art. Don't include the Japanese Imperial flag in your game. Promise you, don't do that. Not good.
And usually leans towards cut this, not add this. Another form of feedback you can get before shipping is focus testing. Now, let me tell you, I've got a whole video, and it's linked below, on focus testing, and I'll just tell you right now, I have a love-hate relationship with focus testing. The love is you get some really good, raw feedback from people who have no idea what they're going to see. The downside is sometimes you just get the oddest, most unactionable feedback, especially from people who, they're like, I like first-person shooters, and you put an RPG in front of them, like, this is dumb.
Yeah, I've had that exact same problem. And it's so frustrating because it's like, okay, well, we needed people who are actually part of this target market. And you've just grabbed like 2 racing game fans, a sports game player, a Call of Duty enjoyer, and, we're making an RPG game. Okay. It's really hard to sift through that feedback and determine, okay, this is coming from a place of this person is expecting it to be more like the games that they enjoy versus feedback. I mean, also feedback can just be so random. It can just be things that are like, oh, well, I had a tough time figuring out, I don't know, like a new system. It's like, well, yeah, you just started the game. Of course you don't know how the system works. It's like, yeah, you have to learn how to play the game. Congratulations, welcome to gaming. I think that some of this too can get really infectious in AAA, where I do have some knowledge, but I don't have any personal knowledge, but I only have secondhand stories that have heard from people who work in AAA, where these focus testers will just they won't understand something very well, or they'll bring in somebody who is completely new to gaming because they want to reach a casual audience, because they have to reach a casual audience, because that's how they're going to make profit on the game is if they can actually reach a wide audience. So they bring in some casual player. This casual player obviously doesn't know how to play games very well, suffers through some early things, and then they put in things like yellow paint to accommodate the casual players that proceeds to dumbify the entire gaming audience, and now every gamer is expecting yellow paint because that's what has been made the standard so that it can reach a casual, wider audience. I agree with Tim. I have a love-hate relationship with focus testers. I think that you're better off not like you're better off trying to find people that fit within that realm on your own, though it's hard to do if you're working with like a publisher, if you have to have like an NDA, if you're keeping things under wraps. That's understandable, but you can always sign an NDA with random people if they get brought in, but try to find people that are part of that audience, that are going to give you accurate feedback. And sometimes finding people that are also in game dev, you can say, here's the stage of the game that we're in. Here's what we're most concerned about. Please provide us the most feedback on that. But if you have any other feedback, let us know. And that way you don't have to get feedback of why I don't like that the UI is incomplete. Yes, it's a prototype. Thank you for the feedback. Very valuable. I will note that when we finish the game and release it, we should have completed UIs. I didn't know about that before. Now I do. Very much appreciated. I mean, that's what you're thinking internally, but of course you don't tell the focus tester that. But sometimes feedback is like that. You're just like, yes, you're right. When I did my mini version of focus testing, I stuck to checking whether they understood the game and controls, but wasn't interested in is this fun yet? That's fair. I mean, that is like focus testing. I'm only focusing on these things. These other things are not on the docket yet. And I think that that's relevant because you don't want to just say, hey, play my game. How is it? Because then the player doesn't know how to, what you should give feedback on. They might just say a whole bunch of random stuff. But if you say, I'm only testing alchemy, please tell me if my alchemy system is fun or not. Ignore everything else. Then you can get accurate feedback just on that thing. It's hilarious. It happens to me every time, dude. Yeah, I don't know. I've had some good focus testing. I've had some bad focus testing. But the most successful focus testing that I've gotten is from industry friends who know like nothing about my game or very little. And I can just say, yeah, the game's in prototype. And they're like, okay. I can just discard any feedback about little visual bugs or whatever. That's the most useful to me.
You're like, I don't know what to do. So focus testing is great. You don't have to feel beholden to all the comments you get from focus testing.
You shouldn't be beholden to all the comments. Again, yellow paint. It's okay if somebody loads up your game for the first time and says, oh yeah, it took me a little while to learn how to use alchemy, but then I figured it out. That doesn't mean that you should necessarily need to make alchemy easier to learn. Sometimes that friction, that desire to learn should pull the player forward and make them experiment, make them test things. It's okay. I mean, you don't run into an Elden Ring boss and you know how to beat it on the first try, or a pop-up appears and says, here's how you beat the Elden Ring boss. No, you go in there, you have some friction, you learn the moveset, and then you overcome it. It's okay sometimes. Funny enough, there is team lead in one of the companies I work for. You can't show any progress that it's not the complete version because he would just go on about everything that it's not done. So annoying. Doesn't sound like a very good team lead then.
But I would recommend doing focus testing as soon as you can, probably as soon as you hit vertical slice.
Agree.
And then another one, the final one I'm going to talk about before shipping, is there's something called mock reviews. These are companies or individuals you can contract. They will play your game and then write a pretend review for it, as if they were working for one of the many game review sites.
I have never heard of that. I don't know if that's still a thing. It could be. I've never heard of that. That's interesting. I could probably just talk to my QA friends. I'll tell you what, they could write a book about their feedback and thoughts on my games every time they play them. Usually negative stuff, but
Working for one of the many game review
yeah,
sites. And often that includes a score. And they back it up
interesting.
by saying, well, I crashed this many times and the story fell apart here, or I couldn't continue here, or I had these problems. But I love this and I love that, and I really
It's
want to keep
useful.
playing. Those are very similar, and they're really good to the reviews you're going to get after you ship. I would listen to a mock reviewer over a focus tester, probably. But what I'd probably do is listen to them for different reasons. I think the mock reviewer will give you more actionable feedback, where the focus testers will give you much better feels, much better vibes. Like, this is how the game is presenting itself. Where
Yeah,
they're
that's what I was just gonna say because the mock reviewer, is experienced. They make their living off of playing games in various stages of development. They understand those stages of development, and the focus tester is literally just going to be somebody that you pluck off the street who doesn't understand that and is just going to tell you how they feel about playing different things. And they don't know the terms, they don't know the terminology. That's not the average gamer. Well, nowadays it's a bit different, but it used to be that the average gamer knew less about games and developmental terms than the average reviewer, uh, and therefore, you would get a bit more, like you said, actionable feedback from the reviewer. So, but they're both important because your average player is closer to the play tester, the focus tester, than they will be to the mock reviewer.
that was good for those particular focus testers or not, you can't deny here's how the game is presenting
Mm-hmm.
itself. So those are the three big sources of feedback before you ship: from the team, from focus testing, and from mock reviews. And then after you ship, there are two big sources of feedback. One is reviews, and that's obvious. You're going to get reviewed by a lot of different sites, so many different kinds of reviews, various types: journalists, bloggers, influencers, vloggers. You're going to get reviews from all kinds of people, and some of them, that's all they do is review things, so that's great. What I would recommend doing with these is try to keep track of the common pros and cons. Also, if it's someone who does a lot of reviews, maybe look at some of their past reviews to see how they skew. If they don't like certain features, if they hate turn-based games, then expect them not to like your game if it's turn-based. But if what you want to make is a turn-based game, look at what other reviewers who like turn-based games are saying.
Yeah, and the sad part is that you can't pick and choose your reviewers. I wish you could, but it's just games journalism is starting to fall into insignificance more and more with every passing day in game development. And because they can't always find the people that like different titles, sometimes they have to shove somebody on a new title because they need to get an article out, a review out, who doesn't like that type of game. And it's hit or miss. You might get a good reviewer, you might get a horrible reviewer. I think that gamers are getting better at spotting these types of reviews, or the obvious clickbait reviews where it's like, oh, well, everybody's giving this a 10 out of 10. And again, this is opinion, right? So it's not like the game is a 10 out of 10 just because everybody says it is. That's up to you, the individual. But then somebody will give it like a 4 out of 10 just because they know that it's going to draw up some hatred, and they probably just didn't like that genre of game anyway. But it is what it is. I think that game reviews do still matter. They don't matter, in my opinion, as much as Steam reviews do nowadays. But that's my feelings. I don't have the metrics on that. I don't know if it's possible to really get metrics on how impactful journalist reviews are anymore, but I would bet that Steam reviews and influencer reviews, like a YouTube review from some big influencer, likely way more impactful than game journalists nowadays.
Don't automatically go, well, he didn't like it, I guess we better be real time. At this point, I want to mention again the UI designer I had on Outer Worlds, Chris Stewart. He went through and collected all the reviews that came out for the Outer Worlds, nice, and put them in a spreadsheet. He analyzed them on all the variations, what they mentioned, how frequently it was mentioned, the pro and con of what was mentioned. So we had this
Very huge.
wonderful
That's very
data
nice.
of look at all these reviews. 90% of them mentioned this feature and they liked it. 30% of them mentioned this feature and they all didn't like it. So it's interesting because 90% all and they all liked is very different than 30% and they all
Yeah.
disliked, because the other 70% didn't even mention it, which tells you something. And if 90% liked it and the other 10% didn't mention they like it, you have to, that's why these numbers are
Yeah,
important.
and
But
and you know, if they didn't mention it, that means it was unmentionable. It didn't have any significance. 90% mentioned that they liked it. Great feature. If nobody mentioned it, but 30% or 70% didn't mention it, 30% didn't like it, that's pretty significant. You know, that's something that you probably have to take a look at and see, can we change this? Should we change this? How can we change this? And there are those rare times where it's like, well, in order to change this, we'd have to overhaul the game. So save it for the sequel.
I'll talk about that at the end when I'm saying what you should do with it. Online comments are similar, and I have a video on do gamers know what they like and do developers know what gamers want. We read online comments, but it's hard because there are so many of them and there's so much disagreement on things. I know gamers don't
Extremes.
like to hear that, but it is true on almost anything. You want to mention there are people who like the feature and people who don't like the
Yeah,
feature.
he's right. Gamers don't understand that. You know, you'll get one guide out in like Discord by somebody who's a bit too involved or emotional about the problem, and it's not even that the problem doesn't exist for them, because clearly it does. But if they're the only person talking about it, maybe it's just not a feature for you, right? And how can you tell somebody that, right? Because then I've tried to tell people that before. I've tried to tell gamers that. 20% of them maybe are like, you know what, I think you're right. The other 80% will literally go on a crusade against you, your game, your team. If you mention that, well, I'd love to change it, but we don't have the time, they will call BS. They will say that you're actively, you know, neglecting the feedback from the player base. Like, there are those crazies out there that will just, it's almost like they wanted to come in and find some problem that feeds their paranoia, and then just then they become a permanent enemy of you and your company. I had that with Darkest Dungeon. The Red Hook had it with Darkest Dungeon. We had it with Train Life. I didn't spend enough time working on Forever Skies to know if they had that, but I bet if I asked the community manager, I bet he would tell me that they probably have those too. There's really nothing you can do to solve that. There really isn't any. I feel like Microsoft didn't have every second version cursed and fix the bad stuff to the next version. There's a reason I'm still in Windows 10.
And I made a video where basically what I said was the signal to noise ratio is low, and people walked away going, he's blaming gamers. What I'm saying is the actionable feedback is surrounded by a lot of inactionable
Well, yeah,
feedback.
because sometimes when players are like arguing online or like on a forum or something, they're not always expecting the developer to be there. Like, there's a difference between saying, "Yeah, I hate this feature," to like some random person on a forum or Steam forums or whatever, versus, "Oh, I'm talking to a developer. Yeah, I don't like this feature, and I don't like it for these reasons, and I wish it could be this." A lot of it is like Group A, where it's like, okay, this isn't actionable. It's feedback, but it's not actionable because there isn't. I don't understand the reason why this person feels this way, versus actually obtaining feedback. So, in my opinion, that's why places like Discord are great, where you have direct access to players and you can see that feedback in real time and engage in it in real time, as opposed to having that latency or, you know, scouring random forums for all this stuff. It's better if players and developers both can just hook up as quickly as possible, or even live streaming development where I can just talk to you guys. And eventually, if the game is funded and released, I can just say, hey, anybody have feedback on the game, anything that you don't like? And I can just collect that immediately. I can have a community manager in chat collecting that too, other developers in chat collecting that feedback and working on it. That's what's great to me. So I'm playing early access and dev stalking the streams. I've done that. I do that all the time. I did that with Darkest Dungeon a lot and with Train Life.
And it's hard to find
More with
it.
Train Life because I was actually the project lead for that.
People say, well, just go to the people who are actionable. Sometimes that's hard to find. But we do track them and we go through them and we do the same thing. We look at what features get mentioned. We look at whether they were liked or disliked. We track how frequently it's mentioned and whether it's pro and con. And then we review it. Keep in mind, and this is why I said it in one of my videos, more and more online comments are skewing con. They list all the things they didn't like about a game and very few of the things they liked. So
I think that's always been the case, at least as long as like internet reviews have existed, because the negative emotions are stronger than the positive emotions. If you buy something on Amazon and it works well, I guarantee 99% of us, me and in chat, we don't leave a positive review. But if something doesn't work, if we don't feel that we got our money's worth, ooh, that's a different story.
you have to take that into account if you're trying to figure out what to do. Bear in mind, many online comments, and I want to even say most, greater than 50%, will certainly include all the things they didn't like. And you have to figure out what to do with that. In fact, let's talk about what to do with feedback. So let's say you've collected all this feedback. What do you do with it?
Ignore it. No.
First of all, you got to look at the feedback. If it's actionable, that's great. If it says this particular thing I didn't like and I wish they had done this, and if the UI just worked this way, it'd be great, that's great. It gives you something to test
collect
right
it
away.
and track it.
If it's non-actionable, then you put it in a pile and go, well, let's see how many people mention this.
Exactly.
If it's just the AI's dumb, if 90% of the people say your AI is dumb, you got a problem with your AI, even if you have no idea what it is. So then you probably want to look at who's giving the feedback. Some companies go by popularity. If 90% of the people don't like something, then that thing is probably going to go away.
I would still say, it depends, right? Because a lot of it is, we talk a lot about like market expectations. If you market your game correctly and you manage expectations of your game correctly, then you can be pretty sure that most of the people, at a very large margin, who buy your game are part of the market that you want to buy your game. It sounds kind of, I guess this might sound really obvious, but it isn't to marketing teams. If you mismarket your game, if you say, yeah, my game plays like Call of Duty plus My Little Pony, but you buy it and it plays like NHL 2025 mixed with Power World, then people who bought it expecting Call of Duty with My Little Pony are definitely not going to find the game as interesting, and they're going to leave bad reviews. Or they might, if your game is a little bit skewed, a little bit off, we had that with Train Life where the publisher mentioned that the game was a ultra realistic simulator, even though in the GDD it says semi-realistic in the very first paragraph. And we were very careful about stating that. People will buy the game or wishlist the game based on this expectation that they're going to get an ultra-realistic simulator. And it's like, well, we get a lot of feedback. Oh, the game isn't as realistic as we wanted it to be. I know. It's never going to be like that because that's never what the game was supposed to be. And now you have that issue. Usually drop one positive review if I bought a couple competitor products that were crappy and one good product I found was way better. It's like a meme of bringing ugly friend on date, +1 to make yourself look better. All I can say is, market your game well, set expectations, very realistic. Hype is important, but you don't want to hype people up for something that doesn't exist. Sean Murray. Don't do it. If your game doesn't have multiplayer, don't say your game has multiplayer.
Other people, though, look at their target demographic. If you're making a dating sim and people who never play dating sims don't like it, maybe you can ignore their comment. If you're making a first-person shooter and somebody says, I play mainly role-playing games and I wish there was a different character skills I could buy, you may be able to ignore that. So you kind of want to know what your audience is and try to look at the feedback from people you targeted. But for a lot of people, it's just, I want to sell as many copies as possible, so I go by sheer number. I go by popularity of the feedback. But you also want to look at how consistent it is. If you have a feature and some people like it and some people hate it, you're going to have to figure out what you want to do. If it's something that most people like or most people hate, it's clear. But if it's the closer you get to 50-50, you might have hit on something polarizing. For some of you, you may go, great, I wanted my game to be polarizing. I wanted that topic to be discussed. I wanted that to be something the game digs into.
Well, that's fine. I mean, but like a game system versus a topic is different, right? If your game system is 50-50% like dislike, maybe you need to like add in an option for that, right? A good example could be Kingdom Come Deliverance with a Savior Schnapps. I mean, it's easy to mod out, of course, but if it is that polarizing, maybe you want to look at it. But if your game is broaching a difficult topic, like, I don't know, uh, even fantasy racism can sometimes these days cause quite a bit of kerfuffle, like Witcher 3 with the elves or something, right? I think that's, if that's meant to be polarizing, that's fine. I mean, players might not like that elves are discriminated against. That's part of the world. Like, write some cool quests about it or something, or, make some characters that maybe some of them perpetuate that by acting in that way. Maybe some try to fight against it, show both sides of this and why maybe the stereotypes exist, even though stereotypes usually aren't a good thing. That's what you can do to help expand on the topic and discuss it. But I think that polarizing topics is not inherently a bad thing. Polarizing game systems might trigger me a bit more from like a game design sense than, the topic that I intended to be polarizing is polarizing. Good. we accomplished it. Fantastic.
And leaves it for the player to figure out what they think. Great. Some people, though, some developers are like, ooh, we don't want to be polarizing. We don't want anyone to say anything bad. And they remove the polarizing
Dragon Age Veilguard
feature. So again, you have to decide what you want to do with your game, which should guide what you do with the feedback.
Yeah, you should, yeah, and the publisher should be told, hey, we're trying to make a game that is broaching these topics or something, or that is, going to be considered offensive to some. Just so, like, everybody can be aware that we're on the same page, that when I have a character pulling their pants and mooning NPCs around the game, that nobody at the publishing studio is like, oh my god, what did you make?
There's also a cost analysis, and a lot of people don't like thinking about this, don't want to think about it, don't even want to admit it exists. But for every potential problem with your game, you have to look at how much will it cost to fix and how much will it cost not to fix. Mm-hmm. In other words, if it's a really pernicious problem that would require redoing a lot of things in the game, it may be really expensive to fix, and you may just go, we're trying to tackle that in the sequel. But if it's causing lots of people to stop buying your game, then there's a cost to not fixing it.
Yep.
And you have to take that into account. How you measure that? It depends on your game. It depends on your budget. It depends on who's paying you. But that cost analysis has to be done.
I've been in that situation. We had that with Train Life. I incorrectly assumed that doing less realistic signals for trains in Europe would be better, just because every country seemed to have different methods of doing signals, some of them extremely complex, and we'd have to teach the player like 10 different signaling systems for Europe. I wanted to avoid that, so I was like, you know what, let's just go let's make our own signaling system that is a bit simpler to understand, that is universal throughout all of Europe. Players didn't really like this, and it was a bit confusing because of the design and some technical issues. Obviously, this was probably the most requested thing that we fix and change, was the signaling system. Unfortunately for players, the game didn't sell very well. It was a very niche game. And there was literally just, even if we desired to do it, we would have to remake every level from scratch with the new signaling system. It just was not going to be possible, unfortunately. Very bad prequel can lower sales of sequel. There's a lot of problems. And gamers just don't understand when you say, yeah, this would cost too much. They're like, well, why did you just implement it? It's like, well, every game is made different. And sometimes games are made in a very efficient way. Sometimes they're made in a very inefficient way. And like we say, every single thing you do in your game is going to create some debt. And you either fix it and have to pay it back, or you deal with it and you never touch that system again. Signals in Train Life was one of those systems where it's like, well, we created too much debt. It would cost a shit ton of money to pay it back. It's not getting changed.
And then finally, you have to think about when and how you want to use the feedback. Even if you've decided this is wrong, this didn't land, this didn't have a good enough appeal, we have a better way of doing this. You have to decide, are you going to patch the existing game, which it's fairly cheap to do that now. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that was an expensive thing to do. Also, publishers control whether or not you can patch, and they may have reasons for not patching that are publisher reasons.
They might, honestly, your game just might not have made enough money. They might say, we can't afford to do that. And you are not allowed. They might even have control over whether or not to make updates live. Even if you made a patch, they might just say, yeah, we don't want to do it. Some updates might need to change marketing materials or like a trailer. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that might do this, but like cutting out an area of the game. Now you have to make a new trailer. Now you have to tell people that that area was cut out of the game or something. There's a lot of reasons why you might get denied, even if you think, yeah, we have a better idea. It wouldn't even cost that much. But publisher might just deny you for that reason. Lose music license. Yep, lose music license. That shit happens all the time.
You may not have the rights to patch. You may instead go, let's fix that in the DLC. In other words, they didn't really like the gunplay, but that's a bit of a significant patch. When we put in the DLC, we'll have better
like
gunplay,
a free patch,
or
or
have
something.
guns that work better, or we're filling the holes that people are saying, hey, there's no weapon that does this.
Yeah.
We'll put one in the DLC. And then finally, you may go, this is pretty significant, and making a patch or putting in the DLC will change the game, like the vibe of the game or how you would play, and from the very beginning. So you may want to go, we'll do that in a sequel. We're change all that gunplay around, but we're going to do it in the sequel. Yep. And then finally, it may be something that's so different. It's like it's true that it's not liked, and it didn't land well in this game, but changing it would be either so costly or so dramatically change the game that you may just go, you know what, we're going to take that feedback into account on the other games we make. And this one, whether it gets a sequel or not, we're just going to leave it alone. It's hard to think of things like that as an example, but you might say, if you're making a Western RPG and someone's like, I hate that all the guns are kinetic. Give me an energy pistol or whatever. You're like, no. I get that you want more variation. We're trying to figure out how to do that with kinetic weapons, but it's a Western.
Yeah, Cauldron Chronicles is a great game, but just add swords and shields. It's like, no. DLC, or as I like to call it, digitally limited content. Hey, some expansions can be good. Witcher 3 had good expansions, good DLC. That is the model of how you should make DLC and expansions.
RPG. However, we're going to make a note that people want way more variety than we provided in this RPG, and maybe in our next RPG in a different setting,
yeah.
we're providing more weapon variety of that type. So, I hope this made sense, and I hope you guys liked this discussion of feedback, how to collect it, and what to do with it.
Yeah, that was a good video. That was a good video, Tim. I agree with everything you said, as usual, because he's a genius. And feedback is just tough, and I understand for gamers it can be tough to see developers react to feedback or how slow it might take, but there is, this grace period that needs to be given to developers, because it's like, if you complain about something, and this is the first time that they're hearing about it, they need to see if other people are also saying this. Then they need to actually talk about it. They need to find a solution, right? If they want to make a solution to this. Then that needs to go into the pipeline for development. And that could be, depending on how efficient and agile the team is, that could be the next week. It could be the next month. It depends from game to game and from team to team. And then it needs to be tested. It needs to be released. There might be another big patch coming out around that time where they would save it for that big patch, because it'll just be easier to put it all into one to like certify on consoles or something, or to make sure it all works properly. it could be a long time before your feedback actually becomes, you see that like bug fix. Well, bug fixes are different, but you might see it take a while before that feedback actually makes it into the game, especially if it's feedback that requires, new localization or new voice acting and therefore localization of the subtitles. All of that can take a lot of time. It can depend on different schedules, different team members. Maybe they have to outsource something because they outsourced something in that system initially and they have to contact that person again or see if somebody else is available. It just takes time. And in a lot of cases, if a developer says, hey, it's just like this would change too much about the game, most of the time they're telling the truth. And it sucks, but it just, not every game is, perfectly modular in some way. I see like Morrowind here. People talk about Elder Scrolls and how awesome it is to mod Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, or Fallout. A lot of engines are not that modular. The creation engine is exceptional in the way that it is very easy to mod. It has a lot of mod compatibility, a lot of things exposed to modding. Some engines are the complete opposite. And some code bases are absolute spaghetti. And it's a miracle that they're working. Sometimes doing something for game A that would take 1 week and a couple people would take 2 months and the entire team to do in engine B. So I don't expect players to know this stuff, but just understand that not everything is made the same. If it was, then every game would be made in the same amount of time, with the same number of people, the same amount of money, and it would be very easy to scope and to budget, to schedule, to plan, and that's obviously not the case considering how many games get delayed and have tons of bugs. So thank you for watching that, guys. I will share the link to that in the chat, and if you're watching on YouTube, of course, the link is below the channel, or below the video, sorry. And go give Tim a subscribe, go give him a big thumbs up, because he makes these videos for us. So thank you for watching that one if you're on YouTube, and I will catch you on the next one. How about YouTube?